Good evening and welcome to the Standing Committee meeting of Monday, April 3rd, 2023. This meeting will now come to order, and I will begin with the land acknowledgement. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, there are no declarations of interest this evening. Are there any changes to the agenda this evening? Trustee Oldfield.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move an amendment to add an item to, and I'll take your direction if this is the correct place, but 8F, a notice of motion.
It's a notice of motion. I believe Trustee Oldfield will be under number 7, recommended actions. So okay. It'll be 7B, notice 7B. Of motion. And we'll call on yourself and Trustee Piniello to make that presentation.
Chair Thatcher, through you, if I may, the agenda can be amended on majority vote of the members. So I think it's a matter that you should put to the members of the committee to vote on the suggested amendment. Yes,
absolutely. Thank you.
So do you require a seconder? Is that what you're saying?
We require a seconder. Trustee Piniello. So we have an amendment to the agenda, moved and seconded.
Thank you, through you, Chair Thatcher. I just wanted to, for a little bit more detail than just a notice of motion, of what the actual item is before we do a vote. Thank you.
Trustee Oldfield, can you give us a little more information around your notice of motion?
Yeah, the notice of motion will be around striking an ad hoc committee. Do you want me to go into the details of the committee, or it's an ad hoc committee dealing with monitoring and evaluating issues such as bullying, prevention, intervention, suspensions and expulsions, progressive discipline, workplace violence, and harassment.
Do you require further information? Okay, thank you, Chair. Are there any questions? So we have an amendment, a notice of motion. I'm looking to ask all in favor of that motion. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. 2, 3, 6, 7. 7 in favor. And Ben, that was your hand up. Thanks. All right. So may I have a motion now to approve the amended agenda? Trustee Arsenault, seconder. Trustee Morton. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Item 5 on your agenda, I'm going to call on Superintendent Andrea McCauley for the Special Education Programs and Services presentation.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Students inspire us and teach us every day. Inclusive learning experiences build from students' individual skills, knowledge, and talents. The intersectional identities that each student arrives with are to be celebrated and amplified as a means of validating the richness of their experience and as a means of valuing and honoring their whole selves. The district, through policy and procedure, is committed to upholding students' right to meaningful access to educational services without discrimination and to be treated with dignity and respect, support equitable educational experiences, opportunities, and outcomes, and to provide inclusive and accessible services, programs, and learning environments. To support this work and to proactively prevent barriers, the DDSB promotes and embeds human rights, anti-discrimination, inclusive design, universal design for learning, and accessibility principles, approaches, and actions in all aspects of its service and learning environments. We are committed to fostering success and independence for each student by providing a range of pathways, programs, opportunities, and services. Our foundational message of Many Paths to Success is a commitment to students in fostering their independence, agency, and autonomy as they move through their individual learning experiences within public education to the many options beyond secondary. Tonight we are joined by Inclusive Student Services System Leads, Connor Jenkinson and Michelle Crawford-Eade, to highlight student learning experiences within inclusive school initiatives and specialized learning programs. Together, it is our privilege to be part of the experiences for all students as we honor many paths to their success. Connor and Michelle.
Evening. DDSB is committed to inclusive programs for all students. Fostering learning experiences and strong outcomes is a foundation for special education supports, resources, and services. All students, inclusive of those with special education needs and intersecting identities, are at the center of all planning. The foundation of all supports, services, and resources is on outcomes-based programs and experiences for students and providing support for students in their learning, well-being, and many paths during their public education experience and beyond. Staff place a strong emphasis on the inclusion of students and providing meaningful, individualized integration opportunities for students accessing special education programs. It is a privilege to be part of the success for all students in their many paths to success. This was at the center of Inclusive Student Services planning for the 2023-2024 school year.
When looking to plan forward, consultation with students, families, caregivers, and voice and choice is essential in planning for many paths to success for our students. We examine individual considerations and differentiated pathways to meet student needs in consideration for specialized placements. Then we layer in with a consideration for 3 to 5 year projections within those placements. The majority of students are able to have their strengths and programming goals supported within regular class placements.
Students' own talents, skills, and knowledge are further fostered through programming, which can take many forms. From the image of what classroom learning looks like through specialized programming, including community opportunities and inclusive experiences. Tonight, we highlight a few of the options for special education placement for the smaller number of students requiring intensive support. The School Support Program is an intensive intervention program that provides students with specific programming to close gaps in literacy, numeracy, and to teach important executive functioning skills such as self-regulation, task initiation, planning, prioritization, goal setting, and self-advocacy. The School Support Program is not a pathway. With our commitment to centering student identities and inclusive, equitable practices in all our classrooms, including inclusive design courses at the secondary level, the need for this program will be reduced.
As a district, we continue to experience a trend in the number of students new to and within the DDSB that require individualized programming that involves functional literacy and numeracy, communication skills, and supports with developing daily living skills. As a result, we are expanding our developmental and practical learning programs at the elementary level. We're building, developing, and fostering inclusive schools throughout the district. Part of this is a strong emphasis in our planning alongside schools on the inclusion of students and the provision of meaningful integration opportunities to support ongoing development and goal attainment. A key goal of that meaningful integration is to foster students' independence and develop their sense of agency and autonomy. This is an important commitment to supporting student achievement, well-being, and pathway goals.
All of our schools in the DDSB have exemplary examples of how we are addressing ableism and moving forward with inclusion. Connor and I have the honor of highlighting a couple of these schools and programs for you this evening. Work education programs, including on-site at McLaughlin Portable Packaging, give students the opportunity to practice skills essential for workplace employment and daily living. The Transition to Work program provides in-community work placement with teacher and EA support. Transition planning, goal planning, and skills and experience building along the way is essential for students to have voice and choice when moving their first adult experience after completing their secondary experience. A goal without a plan is just a wish.
Seneca Trail Public School is a school situated in the North Oshawa area. As a school, inclusionary and special education practices have been at the forefront, and the passion for supporting all students across their school is evident when you walk into the building. I have the pleasure to serve the school and community within my role, and I have the opportunity to ask many members of their school team, what does special education mean to you? They gave some true heart answers, and that really get to the core of what we do in service of students and as duty bearers across the district. I encourage you, when you have a chance, to click on the image of Regina and EA at the Seneca team and John, the principal, to be able to hear some of those answers as well. In our next few video clips, we want to highlight what a school-wide lens, mindset, and commitment to addressing ableism and fostering inclusive education can look like. Interestingly, they both involve frosting, sprinkles, and some really great cupcakes. I had the opportunity to learn about the amazing work that the Practical Learning Program classes at Seneca Trail Public School had done to support their community and their efforts to amplify World Down Syndrome Day this past March 21st. The students of the classes baked 300 cupcakes that they then organized as a school-wide fundraiser in support of Melly's Cafe in Whitby. Let's hear the students from the class present to their school about the efforts at a recent assembly.
What did we do? On March 21, it was World Down Syndrome Day. And to celebrate, we had a cupcake sale. Woman and I made cupcakes in reference to sell to students. We baked 300 cupcakes with blue and yellow icing. We put the icing on the cupcakes. We sold cupcakes in the front hallway to students for $1. It was very successful. Lots of students bought cupcakes. Why did we do this? We wanted to support and raise money for charity that support people with Down syndrome. It is the right thing to do to help others. Thank you everyone for buying a cupcake and making it a great success. Everyone is capable of great things, and you can achieve anything if you put your mind to it.
Where does the money go? The place we have chosen to give the money to is Melly's Cafe in Whitby. The money will help support the cafe and train to get jobs. They make food, make coffee, and sell these items. Many different people with disabilities work at the Melly's, and some of the workers have Down syndrome. The cafe teaches the workers many different skills for future jobs. Check out this video about Melly's Workplace Cafe and Market. cents. Thanks.
Please, very shortly, with a beautiful check presentation that they are walking down to go do. So we might be able to get a few extra video clips out of that too.
As a child, I loved icing and sprinkles, and in February, I was reminded once again the joy of icing and sprinkles. I have the privilege to highlight one secondary school who continues to move forward in inclusionary practices. Under the passionate direction of Dave Brown, culinary teacher at Uxbridge Secondary School, the inaugural Inclusive Culinary Skills Competition took place in February. Competitors from 15 schools participated. All competitors accessed their learning through the Practical Learning Program. Along with their student mentors and family members and support staff cheering them on, competitors had 2 hours to complete 3 recipes. Okay, here comes icing and sprinkles.
You're watching Global Durham. This is Global News.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. I'm Carrie Ferguson. It's been an exciting day for the culinary program at Uxbridge Secondary School as they hosted the first ever inclusive skills competition for students across Durham region. The event even had a few celebrity judges. Lexi Benedict has more.
It's time to batter up because the first ever inclusive skills competition is in town.
See like the magic happen and all the kids doing their work.
The hospitality program at Uxbridge High School brought to life a day-long competition with students across Durham region to participate in a bake-off.
They are teamed up with a mainstream student, one-on-one, and we've designed a menu that they have to recreate, display.
The competition featured a series of judges, including celebrity judge Naz Cavallero, also known as Barbecue Naz from the Food Network.
Because I like to eat.
As well as Leah Daniels, country singer and also former student, who says the idea is revolutionary.
The culinary arts was always an incredible program, but to see where we are now with the first inclusive cooking competition is just so special, and the fact that it's happening here in Uxbridge.
On the menu for today, contestants were asked to prepare chocolate chip cookies, tea biscuits, pretzels, and to finish off, cupcake decorating.
Contestants have been in the kitchen all day and the competition is heating up. But Mr. Brown says he hopes that the lessons they learned from today will last a lifetime.
The learning that's going on today is just absolutely phenomenal.
Competitors were also judged on presentation, food skills, measurements, organization, and safety. The culinary program is already home to an inclusive skills hospitality class, where grades 11 and 12 students partner up with PLP students.
They were paired up and their partners changed each week, and they learned kitchen safety, food safety, and then how to make all sorts of food, from like pastries to pizzas to soups, salads, everything.
Which led to the creation of this competition, emphasizing inclusivity for all students.
This year, Mr. Brown decided that he wanted these students to be able to compete and show their skills that they worked so hard to learn.
I want to emphasize that nobody loses here. Everyone's a winner.
To be perfectly honest, watching the smile on the kid's face. They're getting an opportunity to do something they've never done before, and we're here to show everybody how good these kids really are.
For Mr. Brown, the dream is for Skills Canada to include more inclusive competitions for students in the future. Lexi Benedict, Global News.
Connor and I would like to end the presentation showing the closing ceremony of the Uxbridge Secondary School culinary competition. Clearly pure joy with sprinkles and icing and a pure form of inclusion.
Thank you. So our intention this evening was to provide an overview of both the inclusive practices that schools are embedding as students learn from each other and amplify their skills and strengths, and also to give a little bit of a highlight into the breadth of special education placement classes offered within the DDSB. Quite proud of our students and the staff that wrap around them, both at home and at school. And together with Connor and Michelle, happy to take any questions trustees may have this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent McCauley. The chair recognizes Trustee Morton.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Thank you for the work that you do. I think, Michelle, when you were talking about the inclusive culinary competition at Uxbridge Secondary School, you used the words pure joy. And I can vouch for that because Chair Donna Edwards and I were in attendance that day. There were many parents, there were many grandparents, everyone. They were so excited to be there and to see that kind of a program. So thank you for helping and supporting in that endeavor. I do have a question. I was very surprised to see that we have more than 12,000 students who have an IEP. That's approximately 1 in every 6 students in our board. So I'm curious to know what strategies did we employ to support those many students during our opening and closing times during COVID?
Just wait for it to go red. Yes. We wrap around students in a multitude of ways. And throughout going in and out of COVID, it was a matter of trying to meet students where they were at that particular time, as well as educators, trying to find that right balance of how do we engage, making sure we're engaging in the right ways, as well as trying to, as you had highlighted, meeting as many of their IEP goals and meeting the IEP goals as in that new environment that it was for everybody, especially in that online environment. Now that we are happy to welcome so many of our students back into our classrooms and being able to see them in the classrooms where we've used the phrase, it's back to a little more typical. So we're not having the starts and the stops, but again, the approach is always the same. We look at the individual student and we wrap around them in the levels of support that are most appropriate for them.
Thank you, Chair. It's my belief that we have wait lists for special education programs. I'm wondering how long these might be and how we tackle them.
Learning. Here we go. That's a very good question. What we do is we really take a look at each individual student to see what supports are necessary for them to be successful. We are committed to the most inclusive environment for students. We know that inclusion works for students, and there are many pathways. So we don't have a wait list for special education classes. We take a look at the needs that are in our system, the student needs, and center their needs and wrap the services around. And what that actually means is that we have an integrated system depending upon what the student needs in terms of the supports, and then we go with the school team and actually support the student as they transition and whatever their pathway is. So we're really looking at the most inclusive pathway for students and really centering their identity as we do that.
Sorry, Chair. I have a follow-up.
Sorry about that. I'll come to you in a moment. Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And again, I do appreciate, and I echo Trustee Morton's, attending the culinary arts program, the shared joy, but also just the joy of the student mentors as well as they watched and helped the students when they needed it. I was just so pleased in seeing how the students showed their leadership and developed was part of that development of their leadership skills. But I know you're going to expect this question, is that's just one really, really great example of inclusive education on the culinary arts program. And I know that there's more potential there as far as building skills development programs. I'm just wondering, what are we doing to ensure, to make the rest of our staff comfortable in developing programs such as that, especially around the trades and skills that our students can participate in, so they feel inclusive and also build that leadership with their other students.
Thank you, Donna.
I'll just project and we'll go from there. So when we look at working with students, when we look at working on centering on what their program needs and what their pathway is actually looking at, we work with school teams to be able to, and we go out looking section by section, so period by period within the school, to look at what are those opportunities, what are those moments for integration that are also fitting with the pathways of the particular students that are there in the school at that particular time. So it's really about a deep dive with the school teams to look at what are the pathway needs for our particular students, and working with teams to constantly look at integrated adaptive courses, as well as working through and saying as well that OSSTF has often partnered with us in being able to work through those layers as well.
Trustee Edwards, we also use examples like the culinary program at Uxbridge in coordination as we go out. Connor and myself and our teams, our instructional facilitators, go out and use it as examples of how to. We have many excellent examples of adaptive physical education classes, adaptive music, and adaptive tech at some of our schools. So I think it is growing. It is a work in progress, but I think by highlighting programs like what has happened at Uxbridge Secondary School, it opens up possibilities, and therefore we can take a look at individualized pathways for students and make the connection for our secondary school teachers and school programs.
Student trustee Ben Cameron. Go ahead, Ben.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm a gifted student, and I would say that I almost never struggle with my education, which I'm lucky. And to me, it seems like gifted students are the smartest, and they're already ahead of the game. And through the gifted program, we put resources into the gifted students. So to me, it seems like we're letting the smartest kids get a bigger advantage, and I'm wondering why that might be wrong.
Superintendent McCalling.
Thank you. So I think an important question when we look at the individualization of each student, because I would agree that we have cognitive strengths, but we also know that research shows that there's a lot of complexity to how gifted learners experience both social environments and classroom learning, and the importance of the accommodations in meeting both strengths and needs. So it's important that when we look at the range of all of our learners, that we are identifying, and quite often I'll draw on a former mentor who had a background in psychology, who talked about the tails of the bell curve in terms of the individualization of the needs of learners. So although everybody experiences the school system differently, it is really important, and I would draw back to the question around the pandemic. Our gifted population was one that experienced the pandemic very differently in terms of two ends of an experience, both either thriving or of high concern, and bringing other accommodation needs forward during that period and continuing as well. So I appreciate your comment, but in terms of our board's commitment to all of those who require accommodations, those who identify as gifted are certainly part of that, and following the research to do that within schools, both, again, regular placement and within program placement as well.
Supplemental?
Thank you, Chair. So along with being gifted student, I have an IEP. I'm wondering I've never been asked about my IEP or seen my IEP be implemented, frankly. Like, I know kind of what's in it, but I've never really seen it in my experience in the education system. I'm just wondering how we might make sure that teachers are following students' IEPs and making sure they're implemented.
It's a very good question, and it's one where we spoke about, at the very beginning, we talked about voice and choice through students, through caregivers, through family, and really we're trying to amplify part of that. So part of our process actually during this year was during the first 30 days to be able to have schools really reach back and start to do exactly as you said, to be able, especially with our secondary students, where are they involved in that particular process as well? And then also for our elementary students and having the families involved in that process. So the consultation becomes a collaborative process, which is really the way that it should be intended and how we are trying to actualize it. We're still working on it, and there's still lots that we can do across the system, but again, we are working very hard on it.
Go ahead, Ben.
Thank you, Chair. My last question, do students help to maybe identify students who may need an IEP and kind of work through the system, not exactly sure how it works, or are students and their families responsible for advocating for themselves for an IEP?
Can you clarify that? Are you asking whether students participate in the development of the IEP, or are you asking who is involved in the creation of the IEP? Is that what you would like us to address?
I think, through you, Chair, I think the question is more if a student doesn't have an IEP and they might need an IEP. Who might be responsible for identifying the students that need an IEP?
That depends. If a student is in elementary, for example, usually what happens is the teacher would come forth, for example, seek out the CERT for support. If we're talking about a secondary student, I've had secondary students that fully advocate for themselves, and and if they can't do that, the same process actually follows. The question that you had before in regards to student participation, we encourage student participation in the development of their IEP, along with family and caregivers as well. I think it's a very important skill, particularly for secondary students as they move on in their pathway. The expectation is when they get to post-secondary and or the workplace, they have to be able to advocate what they need in order to have accessibility, whether it be at the workplace or in their post-secondary university or college. So we are working on it. It is a plan in progress, but I do advocate for students to participate, particularly in secondary, to be at those meetings and advocate for themselves for what they need, as it is an essential skill once they leave and move out of the public education system.
And part of our annually published special education plan, as one of the appendices, is our many paths to success. And that really starts to talk about some of the ways in which we do engage in that process as well.
So thank you very much for all that you do for our special students. Thank you to Superintendent Macaulay, and to you, Connor, and to you, Michelle. A question, Kelly?
Yes, thank you, and through you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, following up with the question regarding gifted. I know that in recent research, they have been finding that children that have been identified with exceptionalities are also showing having an LD. Has that come up a bit more in the reviews and in placement suggestions? Because I'm just wondering how that is identified, how common is that identified?
So as one of the categories of exceptionality, learning disability is actually one of our broadest and one of our most often seen across the system. So if it's really just looking at how often does that arrive in a classroom as one of the exceptionalities that students may present with, it does show up quite often. And there is often work because we do know that a lot of our students, that's a very specific portion of what that learning disability does look like and how it presents within our students. So that's why we want to wrap around and we want to be able to look at what those resources and those right supports are for that particular student, because one student with a learning disability is one student with a learning disability, just so we say within every exceptionality as well.
I can further to that through you, Chair. Each student is an individual, and the strategies that they need and the supports that they need for success vary. So it's a complex question because each individual student comes with their own strengths, their needs, and the supports that we need to put in place for them to be successful. So yes, learning disability is one of the exceptionalities that we see more frequently. However, it's not a broad scope of what is needed for each of the students. That's why they have an IEP, and that's why we want students to be involved, particularly at secondary, in the development of their IEP, so that we can make sure that they understand what accommodations they need so that we can allow for them to have accessibility to the curriculum. So it depends because the strategies and the supports that we put in place vary from student to student because we are centering their identity as we take a look at the supports that are needed.
Thank you. I think specific to the dual exceptionality as well. So within our population of gifted learners, we have seen an increase of those with the second exceptionality of either learning disability and or gifted with autism seeking placement within the elementary program at a greater rate than those seeking to remain in regular class placement. So in general, the learners with accommodations only for intellectual giftedness have a split between the two placements where we do see families seeking that special education design and model of support for those that have that second exceptionality as part of their learning profile.
Thank you, Superintendent, and thank you for your presentation. I brought that question forward because it is evident that in the past, there has been a lot of students underserved because of the fact that they have the gifted aspect and then maybe it's been missed that they have also intellectual or learning disability. And so that's very important when I'm speaking to parents in the community and they're not sure in which direction to go, but I'm very happy and proud to know that we are a progressive board and that there is great work in that area. Thank you so much.
So I'll thank you again. Moving on to item 6 on the agenda, I'll call on Director Camille Williams-Taylor for the director's update.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. April is typically a month filled with optimism. The days are longer, the flowers start to come up, and we catch a renewed energy as we approach the home stretch of the 2022-23 school year. It's also a month where we recognize a number of significant events across cultures and communities, and I'm pleased to share the following update this evening. Sikh Heritage Month takes place in April, and we take this time to celebrate the long and vibrant history of Sikhs in Canada and to educate future generation about the experience of Sikh Canadians and the important role that they have played in shaping the identity of our country. We're also encouraged to recognize April as Genocide Awareness, Education, Condemnation, and Prevention Month, an important time for all of us to recognize that many religious and ethnic communities who have experienced persecution over time now call Ontario home, recognizing sadly that genocide and cultural genocide continues to cause trauma and suffering in the lives of many. Awareness and education are the first steps towards change, prevention, and the protection of human rights. On Friday, March 31st, last week, we recognized Transgender Day of Visibility. This is a day dedicated to valuing transgender people and to raise awareness of the realities of exclusion and discrimination faced by this community worldwide. to show support and stand in solidarity with the transgender community as we reflect on visibility, rights, and allyship, along with the work that we must continue to do to dismantle all forms of oppression. A flag-raising ceremony took place at the Education Center last Friday. This session was very well attended, with students, staff, and community partners bringing messages of our collective commitment to upholding human rights. The second annual Empower Her conference took place in DDSB elementary schools on March 30th, last week. The full-day event provided an opportunity for students in grades 6, 7, and 8 to identify as Black and female, to connect with each other and learn from strong female mentors about the importance of setting goals to achieve their fullest potential. Participants were encouraged to become leaders and change makers within their own communities. And lastly, registration for students in grades 7 to 12 to attend Durham Integrated Arts Camp this fall is now open until Friday, April 28th. DIAC, the Durham Integrated Arts Camp, is a creative learning environment. It provides students who have a passion for music, visual art, musical theater, and dance, with opportunities to develop a deeper understanding of their art and abilities by making authentic connections amongst the arts and disciplines. And this is all for my update this evening, Chair.
Thank you, Director. Are there any questions for Director this evening? And I'm seeing none. And moving on to item 7 then, recommended actions, and I call on Associate Director Markovsky to speak to the school year calendar 23-24.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Thatcher, the report begins on page 31 of your package this evening. During the board meeting on March 20th, 2023, a discussion took place about the allocation of professional development / activity days. The report this evening is a response to that discussion and to seek approval for the 2023-2024 school year calendars. I want to begin by acknowledging our trustees and student trustees with efforts to decenter dominant structures and to include diverse communities' dates of significance. The DDSB is committed to efforts to enhance inclusion. And when assigning PA days, equity and other complex factors, including impact on modified school calendars and communities, must be considered, in addition to the purpose of the PA days. After reflecting on the discussion that took place, we wanted to provide you with additional information on the scheduling of PA days and the challenges that are created to align a PA day with a date of religious or spiritual significance. The main purpose of PA Day is to provide staff with timely and relevant professional learning on Ministry of Education and DDSB strategic priorities. We require and expect staff to participate in essential professional learning activities. Moving a PA Day to a date of religious / spiritual significance would introduce a barrier for staff and impact their ability to either participate in learning or practice their observance. PA days are also scheduled to align with the requirements of collective agreements and with the cycles of teaching and learning that take place in schools. For example, the preparation for the school year, parent interviews. There's also a PA day at the end of the year to help close with what we would say was end of year functions. Scheduling of parent guardian interviews might also be compromised in situations like this if staff and or parents or guardians cannot attend because of religious or spiritual observances on PA days. There are many dates of significance reflecting the diverse communities we serve. And we also recognize there are also variations within communities about which dates are observed and when. In Appendix C of your report is an extract of the April and May dates of significance. Outside of the prescribed PA days, we have a very limited number of PA days to work with. Issues of fairness and equity will become a factor if we attempt to prioritize one set of observances over another. Our current practice is to ensure that students and families have the opportunity to work with their schools to identify dates of significance they wish to observe, and staff may work with our Human Resource Services Department to accommodate dates of significance and observances. I do want to bring your attention to the consultation process. Our current consultation process is an extensive one that involves feedback from our community partners, employee groups, SCCs, and other stakeholders. As you know, we also attempt to align our calendar with the Durham Catholic Board of Education as a cost savings measure. Given the interest expressed in the allocation and setting of PA days, our recommendation for the 2024-2025 school year calendar will be an expansion of our consultation process to consider various additional perspectives, including student senate, employee affinity groups, and the opportunity for individual family input. To conclude, a change to the calendars at this point in the process would significantly compromise the consultation process that has already taken place, and that aligning a PA day with a date of significance does not take into account other priority factors. I want to sort of come back to where we started and stress the importance of decentering dominant structures, and hope that the expansion of the consultation process for the school year calendar would provide a larger scope of diverse perspectives that can help inform the school year calendar process next school year. With that being said, it is recommended that the proposed 2023-2024 school year calendars be approved as outlined in appendices A to D, and the 2023-2024 school year calendars will then be forwarded to the Ministry of Education, ensuring that we meet the April 14th deadline. That is the end of the report. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Associate Director Markowski. Just going to, the chair recognizes Trustee Morton.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I want to point out, and I just want to reiterate a lot of the things that Associate Director Markowski has said. Firstly, PA days are not considered board holidays because the majority of our staff are involved in professional development activities on those days. I also realize that much consultation, much collaboration has gone into the creation of these school calendars. That's very, very important. And I also realize that we definitely need to work with our sister board because that transportation piece is extremely important as well. So with that understanding, I'm looking at the recommendation on page 36, and I would like to move that recommendation.
Go ahead, Trustee Morton.
It is recommended that the proposed 2023-2024 school year calendar...
Trustee Morton, could you begin with I move that, if you wouldn't mind?
I move that the proposed 2023-2024 school year calendars be approved with the appendices A to D. The 2023-2024 school year calendars will then be forwarded to the Ministry of Education, ensuring that the Durham District School Board is compliant with requirements outlined in Regulation 304.
Thank you. Looking for a seconder? Chair Edwards. So we have a motion. It is moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I think we'll begin with Ben. Go ahead, Ben.
Thank you, Chair. So, I just had a question. I believe that we referred a motion to the board. Would a trustee have to move that for it to be on the floor? Because we have a motion on the floor, but I believe we referred a motion.
I believe the motion, Student Trustee Cameron, I believe the motion that was put forward, moved and seconded, and it was carried, that a report be brought back to the board. And that is what Associate Director Markowski is doing this evening. Do you have another question?
Okay, it was my understanding that it was deferred, that the motion was deferred, but that's okay if it wasn't.
We have a time issue here. We have a deadline of April the 14th, and I believe that was understood by trustees that this needed to come forward this evening at the Standing Committee in order for us to meet that deadline to the Ministry. Is that correct, Associate Director Markowski?
That is accurate. Thank you.
Okay, I'll continue then. So I'm I just wanted to quickly note first that I think when I brought forward that we move a PA day, but I think this discussion has been too focused on solely PA days because we can actually change around board holidays onto different days as well. We have an extra one the day, we have a Friday before March break that isn't related to a specific holiday. There's definitely flexibility in the calendar. So just on that, I'm at this table to represent students, and their voices are very clear to me that they don't want more of the same. As I've said before, change is not going to happen if we don't advocate for it, and I'm really not interested in being a rubber stamp. It is this board's job to govern and to balance the various interests between stakeholders and interest groups. I have lots of faith in staff that they would be able to implement whatever calendar we pass, and I recognize that they don't like this, and I also recognize that trustees want time to hear and consider consultations on this change. So I think that we should, in fact, pass the calendar as recommended by staff and direct them to consult on including diverse days of observance into the calendar next year. There are, as I've said, more options than just moving a PA day, and I don't think it's necessarily the best option. So this would allow staff to figure out what they think is best along with the community. Because I think that we should absolutely look beyond the ministry guidelines and look at the tools we have to create the system we want. In Eastern Ontario, a school board is trying to move to a 4-day week for their school calendar. I think there's a lot more radical things that are going on than moving a couple of holidays around. I don't know all the answers, and I don't know what the best calendar is, but I know that the proposed one is not our best option, but as of right now, it is our best option because of consultation reasons and all this. I'm also glad that in the report, Appendix E was included, showing off all the days of significance in April and May. And I counted around 26 days of significance. And I counted how many are days off of school, and it's around 3. And how many of those are Christian-based or Eurocentric? 3, all of them. In the report, it says that issues of fairness and equity will become a factor if we prioritize one set of days over another. Frankly, I think that's absurd. We're already doing that. We are prioritizing Christian holidays and only Christian holidays, even if that's not what's intended. And I don't see that this current system is fair. We have to recognize that not every religion or holiday is going to be perfectly reflected in our calendar, but the answer cannot be to do nothing. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a caution, student trustee Cameron, that we do have a time limit for speaking. And I'm going to now go to trustee Edwards, followed by trustee Panillo.
Thank you, and I appreciate the option as far as consultation for the next year. I did hear from a couple of my community members from representing different groups that said appreciated the discussion at the board table, but wished for the calendars to stay the same, and welcomed the opportunity to be part of a further consultation, which you've already identified, for the next school calendar year. As one of the things is that if we are going to look at the school calendar in that consultation matter, that we don't prescribe or describe a prescriptive sort of change to the calendar, and that consultation be a free consultation, which I'm sure that will be. So I don't want the board to actually put any caveats or prescribe anything at this point in time, because then those ideas will come through freely. So I am going to be voting in favor of this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, trustee Edwards. I would like to make a comment myself. I would certainly agree with my colleagues, and I feel that this is a fair and reasonable request made by staff for the calendar to move ahead this year as is. with a view to taking a look further next year. So I also will support the motion. Trustee Brown.
Trustee Pinello, I believe, is still waiting.
Oh, yes. Trustee Pinello, I'm going to ask you to jump in here.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments. Ultimately, I realize that we have a time limit, and so naturally I'll be voting in favor of passing this, but I do think it's important, as was mentioned at the last meeting when this was deferred, to touch on a couple of things. So one, we understand that PD days, which were not, Student Trustee Cameron's expanded the scope on this discussion, which I think is important, are not necessarily days off for staff, and so I appreciate that in the report. But I also think that it's staff, but it's also students and families. So we, as Student Trustee Cameron mentioned, do place PD days right before Christian holidays, should they fall on weekends, or should they fall over extended weekends. And this has been the norm. I do flag and perhaps take issue with how equity is being framed in this, because this idea of issues of fairness and equity will become a factor if we prioritize one set of days over another. I think that's what we have been doing for a long time. And the fact that we sync our PD days with the Catholic Board, I'll use the PD days as an example, I think just reinforces that, because that is an entire institution whose entire focus is going to be around Christian holidays. And so it's very difficult for me to see the word equity thrown in there, because that's not equity. And we can debate about, different communities and different religious and cultural groups and days of significance all we want, but the reality is that I don't think we've ever asked people if there was a way that we could structure our years to give balance to the diversity that we have in our board. And so I'm very much in favor of consultation, but not just in the sense of opening up to have nice discussions, but with the intention of rebalancing and not using equity as a way to get out of it when we also cite cost savings around doing these changes. We are doing a student census to understand the diversity and all that comes with that of the identities of students in our board. And so to sit here and, make policy around calendar and ignore some of the ways that we can apply that information, I think does a huge disservice to our communities. And so, yes, I understand we have a limited amount of time for this year, and so of course we'll have to adopt this calendar as is, but I do take issue with how the word equity has been framed here, especially as it comes just before cost savings and in line with, we are synced with the Catholic Board of Durham. And so that is not equity, and I don't think we'd be well representing our communities if we simply say it'll turn into a one more important than the other, because we haven't tried it yet. And so until we do, I think we should remain open-minded and very optimistic and positive and proud that this has come up and that so many of us are open to exploring it for next year. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And so I'll be voting in favor with the intent to have thorough consultation, be very mindful and intentional next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Pinillo. I'm going to go to Trustee Brown because she hasn't spoken yet to this. Go ahead, Trustee Brown.
Thank you. I think with this report, thank you, by the way, for this report. I think it's brilliant. I think what we've forgotten a lot about is that parents that work, so they tend to have these holidays off work, and it has to also work in line with that. So even though we could switch it around to this day and all that day, what about the parents? Are they now all having to take off other days, and then within their role, they've still got the days that we've got set here? I mean, I know personally that I would work around those PA days and all these other days presented once I'm given the dates, and I would work it out with my employer. Now, I'm just wondering, because, yeah, I know, I'm not saying that we cannot be diverse, of course we can, but we do have to take that into consideration, is that not everyone gets just have a day off here and there. Not everyone's job is that job. And I believe that when we are looking at next year, that is something to take into consideration. And that's what I think.
Thank you, Trustee Brown. I'm going to go to Student Trustee Gwen Hewitt. Go ahead, Gwen.
Thank you, and through your chair, I think that if there was more time, many of us wouldn't support this motion, because echoing what Trustee Panillo said, what Trustee Ben Cameron said, that it doesn't highlight equity the way the board really emphasizes what equity is. So next year, I really do think that we will need to revise and re-examine the consultation process from what it is right now, because I feel like I don't even really know what it is right now. And I think gaining a better understanding of it, like I have the understanding of the student census consultation, if I had that kind of understanding of the calendar consultation, then maybe the calendar would look different, right? Because we would all have a better understanding of what that looks like. And then kind of going off what you said, Trustee Brown, how we could kind of create a ripple effect here, right? So I think that we could, like, this might be a bit far-fetched, but I think that maybe if we start recognizing these holidays and then parents have to take that time off, then employers know, oh, a lot of people are taking this day off. So then in their calendar, they look up what is on this day. Why is everybody missing work this day? They find out that that's like a religious or spiritual event or day of significance. So then in that that employer's reign, they are recognizing that that day as a date of significance, and then in their in their organization, they are then recognizing that day too, and so on and so forth. So I think it would be kind of interesting if we were able to sort of set an example like that. And I mean, it starts here. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Williams-Taylor, go ahead, Director.
Thank you, Chair. I certainly do appreciate the conversation here because it certainly does reflect the fact that we can be a conduit for change. And I think that in many ways we saw in the presentation around special education that indeed we do embrace opportunities for being innovative and embracing change. I was engaged with a number of conversations with colleagues across the province about some of the opportunities to consider different ways of addressing the calendar. But just as mentioned here, we do recognize we do have a time constraint. I do believe that out of the discussion today, it certainly has shed light on a discussion around consultation and how it is that we build our structures, that we don't necessarily build our structures through a cookie cutter, but that we have made commitments to human rights and engagement, innovation, and Indigenous rights. And because we've made those commitments, we do need to reflect differently about how we undertake our institutions. What I do want to just make a clarifying and corrective statement is that this matter for discussion is not at all about what the staff wants or what the staff likes. That indeed, the staff is quite committed to doing the work of the consultation and reflection, and that we are in fact a part of a shared leadership model where we do take reflections from the trustees, the Board of Trustees, all the trustees, and reflect back on how it is that we build forward. So I do want to make a corrective point about the fact that this has nothing to do with what the staff likes, but indeed it is a commitment around how it is that we balance all of our responsibilities and ensure that we meet the requirements that have been set out for us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director. The chair recognizes Trustee Thompson. Go ahead, Jill.
I just wanted to agree with the comments made by Trustee Panillo and Student Trustee Cameron. We all know that this is a country really built on colonialism, and it doesn't surprise me that every single holiday that is taken or observed is Christian, and I think it's really great that student trustee Cameron said, like, there's no way of making change unless we try. So I totally I just wanted to back up those two comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And student trustee Cameron, respectfully, I would ask that you work within the time restraints that we have as part of our bylaws. Student trustee Cameron would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very aware of the rules. So I would like to suggest an amendment to the current motion to add, and I'll read it slowly for our secretary, that staff, when crafting the 2024-25 proposed school year calendar, consult on and consider including diverse religious and non-religious holidays and days of observance. So I think the point of this motion is to make sure, is to look beyond potentially ministry guidelines and kind of I think it reiterates some of the topics that were discussed around consultation and making sure that staff are consulting and showing the board next year how that consultation is happening and what the results of that were. So I can read it again for trustees if they would like.
Jillian, did you get that motion? Executive Lead Sir Janik, is there an opportunity for you to put that up on the screen for us? I just want to put this motion up on the screen so that it's easy for us to see what is put forward here. Student trustee Cameron has suggested a motion. Will be required for that motion to be put forward, mover and seconder by trustees. Associate Director Markowski.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, if I may, I just wanted to build on student trustee Cameron's comments and maybe even take it a step further if you were okay with it. I'm happy in the fall to bring forward a report to the board of the full consultation process, which will allow you an opportunity to give input to that before we implement it. And I think that will likely address student trustee Cameron's comments this evening. I don't want to sit here and try to impact your motion, but I guess in terms of a commitment and ensuring transparency in the discussion that we had today, perhaps next year we could bring the actual consultation process forward. Everyone will have an opportunity to review it and approve it, and then at which point we'll move forward with it in terms of consultation for the school year calendar.
Go ahead, trustee Cameron.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, this would be to amend the motion to add underneath. So we have the current motion of approving the calendar, and this would then add this second part. I'm not sure if I mentioned that. And I would much appreciate that report. Hopefully I'll be back next year. But I'm happy with the motion as it is, and I would ask for a mover.
Just for clarification purposes, Ben, you're asking that we amend the motion, the recommendation here that we see in this report, to add this to that? Okay. All right, let's... Okay, so we have a motion. We have a motion, an amendment to the motion. And I'm just looking for a seconder for the amendment. A mover and a seconder, actually. Calling on a trustee for that. Trustee Edwards?
I was just going to say that it's yes, we need it's not a motion yet until it's
Not
first,
yet?
at this point in time, but I'm not willing to amend it at this point in time because I find it prescriptive at this point in time.
Trustee Oldfield?
If you're looking for a seconder, I'll second it.
I'm looking for a mover first. Will you move that?
Sorry, I will move it, sorry.
Move that. So now looking for a seconder. Yes, Trustee Thompson. All right, so we have an amendment to the motion. At this point in time, we're going to vote on the amendment only. So we'd be voting on the amendment only. Is there any further discussion? Trustee Morton?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I'm looking at the top of page 33, and it says, "Our current practice is to ensure that students and families have the opportunity to work with their schools to identify dates of significance they wish to observe." So I think that's providing a level of leverage for our children and our families.
I think what you're saying is that the schools do celebrate many other days of significance. Thank you, Trustee Morton. I'm going to now call on Chair Edwards. Go ahead, Donna.
Thank you. As I said, I prefer not to add this at this point in time. If anything, I think it's still a little prescriptive on the consultation process. And I think what Associate Director Barkowski has suggested is bringing back a report with the consultation process to show us sort of the changes in the process and who they plan to consult is more important so that we get a more fulsome idea of and all the community input from those various groups. So I really can't support adding this particular amendment. Thank you.
Trustee Cameron, you have spoken to this several times, so I'm going to move on here and I'm going to call the vote.
I haven't spoken yet.
Going to be calling the vote on the amended motion. Trustee Oldfield?
Sorry, I haven't spoken on the amendment. I moved it, but I haven't spoken even though I moved it. So I hear what people are saying about there's a process in that it says that, we can have a report on what the process has been, but I think the key difference between having a report on, what the consultation process is and the amendment is that we want the process to look different, right? And I think that's key for me, that this amendment is for staff when looking at the consultation process, turn their minds to including diverse religious and non-religious holidays, because that's not something that's been done in the past. And I understand that it is challenging, that there may be people who are unhappy or maybe not. I mean, I don't know, but I think until we actually go through the process with our minds sort of turned to that in achieving this, we won't know. But it concerns me that there's an issue with wanting to change the lens with which we're looking at the consultation process, because that's what this amendment to me actually does. So I'm in support of this amendment because I'd like to see the calendar looked at through an equity lens.
Thank you, Trustee Oldfield. Trustee Linton. Go ahead, Stephen.
Hi, good evening, and through you, Chair. I'm going to echo the thoughts of Trustee Oldfield. I won't be voting for this motion for the simple reason that I don't think it captures enough. I think the last statement by Trustee Oldfield was key in terms of looking at it through a diversity lens. And religion, non-religion is captured within there, but there are other dates of significance that I feel would be captured by changing the language a little. So maybe what I would do is consider changing this motion. I don't know if this is the right time to do it, but to consult and consider holidays and dates of observance through an equity lens.
I'm just going to ask Council Cotter to, if he wouldn't mind just jumping in here. I believe I need some direction, Council Cotter. I'd like to call the question on the amendment only, unless, of course, you direct me otherwise.
Well, I wouldn't threaten you, Chair Thatcher, but I can give you my best advice. I think on the amendment, I don't think that Student Trustee Cameron has spoken to the amendment yet, and we are in a committee meeting, which, of course, we don't have the time limits that we have in board meetings. So, and I think he may be the only speaker left. So I think in the interest of moving on, I suggest that Student Trustee Cameron be given an opportunity to speak to the matter before the amendment I'm talking about. Yeah. He hasn't spoken to that yet.
Go ahead then, Student Trustee Cameron.
Thank you,
to
Chair.
the amendment.
Sorry, Chair Thatcher. And I may have missed it, but Executive Lead Sir Janik advises that Trustee Linton may have tried to move an amendment to the amendment. Is that correct? Is that a fair understanding? I didn't pick that up, so.
That's right.
That may be another, we have to deal with that as well. Obviously, it doesn't preclude Student Trustee Cameron from speaking, but it may be better to find out if, Trustee Linton's suggested amendment to the amendment is seconded, and then we deal with that one first, and proceed through them in that order. But I'm sorry, I didn't catch what the amendment to the amendment was.
Trustee Linton, do you mind putting your suggestion then in the chat?
Yeah, will do.
I wasn't able to catch everything that you were saying, and I do want to understand what you're suggesting.
Trustee Linton, you can also repeat it and I'll try and catch it. I just missed the first half of it.
Thank you. Trustee Linton, if you would repeat it, Executive Lead Sir Janik will put it up on the screen for us.
So that staff, when crafting the 2024-25 proposed school years, to consult and consider dates of observance through an equity lens.
Thank you, I have it.
Executive Lead Sir Janik, would you mind reading that amendment then? Would you mind reading that out for us?
We do need a second. Do we need a seconder for that one? I believe.
Sorry?
Yeah, I'm just looking at it. You know, I'm not sure it's an amendment to the amendment. I think it's actually a new amendment. So just in terms of rank order here, I'm not sure this motion, normally you deal with amendments to amendments in reverse order. But yep. I don't, in my view, this is not an amendment to the amendment. This is a new amendment, striking out the old language and inserting this. So I would suggest in this particular case, it's appropriate to deal with the amendment that was suggested by student trustee Cameron, and we have a mover and a seconder. That motion's on the floor. This is not an amendment to that amendment. I think this is a new amendment. If that motion is defeated, then we would then move to trustee Linton's motion. That would be my suggestion, Chair Thatcher. So, in other words, Executive Leader Janik, if you could create an original version of the suggested amendment. So my suggestion is we deal with the motion in the black font first. That's at the top of the screen. And if that motion is defeated, we would then move to the motion, suggested amendment motion in red font, assuming it's seconded.
So that's the original amendment put forward by student trustee Cameron. We have a mover and a seconder on that amendment.
That's correct. So I think there's just any more discussion on that amendment, and then you can call the vote on that.
Thank you. Student trustee Cameron.
I'm happy with the language that Trustee Linton put forward, and yeah, I guess this motion could be defeated, and then.
Well, Council Cotter has indicated to us, student trustee Cameron, that is actually a separate amendment. So we're going to vote on your amendment first, and then we'll go from there. I'm seeing no further discussion.
Hi, Chair. Hi. Trustee Pinello.
Trustee Pinello, go ahead.
Thanks. I guess point of clarification. My understanding, and maybe Trustee Linton's the best person to answer this. I hear Council Cotter, but when Trustee Linton read the amendment the first time, it sounded like the only words being swapped out was diverse to equity and religious and non-religious to days of significance. So can we just clarify if the intention was to do a separate amendment or if it was to amend the amendment? Because that was my understanding, was that it was just an amendment to certain words, just so that it was a little bit more in line with the comments that had gone around by trustees during the discussion. If so, that's fine.
Trustee Linton, I wonder if you could clarify, because we did have that up on the screen. I didn't hear that you had any disagreement with that. Am I wrong?
So with what, which part? So, yeah, I think originally to consult and consider, staff and craftsmen to consult and consider dates of observance through an equity lens. Putting out there, I think those were the words used in the original motion. I just played with the words a little bit more, but although it was a short time ago, I don't remember exactly what I said, so sorry, that's
Trustee Linton, the question is then, your amendment was, Council Cotter mentioned that your amendment was a new amendment and not an amendment to the amendment. And I believe you were good with that. What I'd like to suggest is that we vote on the amendment that's up on the screen, and then after that, we'll take a look at your amendment.
Yeah, I think it's, if I may, Chair Thatcher, I think, in fairness to Trustee Linton, we can frame it this way. There's two options for the board. Option one is the wording in black. Option two is the wording in red. If the board prefers the wording in red, they just defeat the first one and vote on the second one. So it's sort of option A and option B, I think, is the way we can manage it. So I agree with you. We can call the vote on the First Amendment in black. If that's failed, then we move to the wording in red.
Okay, so I'm calling the vote on the amendment only that's up on the screen. Is there anyone who wants that to be read? If you're in favor or opposed to the amendment. Okay. I believe that all are opposed. All right. Motion is defeated. Trustee Linton, if you could just put forward your amendment. Executive Lead Sir Janik will now put that up on the screen for us.
I think he's got it. It's there, Madam
Has he got
Chair.
it?
So we have a mover, we just need a seconder now, and then you can open the discussion on that.
Okay. So Trustee Linton has put forward an amendment. We need a seconder. Looking for a seconder. Are you seconding that, Trustee Brown? Trustee Brown seconding that. Is there any discussion? Student Trustee Cameron.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy with the language in this motion, and just some things that I would like to mention. This is more about embedding in the calendar dates of observance. As well, this doesn't have to be the whole consultation. This is just saying as a part of the consultation, the board wants the community to be consulted on dates of observance and their dates of observance. Yeah, I support this motion. And I would like to ask for a recorded vote. Thank you.
That staff, when creating the 2024-25 proposed school year calendars, to consult on and consider dates of observance through an equity lens. I am happy to call the vote just in place of the secretary and recording secretary for this meeting.
It's fine, it's fine. We can go ahead at this point and call out the names. I can do it, Rob, if you want.
I have it. Ready to proceed?
Trustee Edwards?
Just clarify, so the vote was, the amendment was seconded by Trustee Brown, is that correct?
That's right. Thank you for the reminder.
Oh, okay. And so, sorry, I wasn't sure it was seconded. I just wanted to make one comment before we go to vote.
Okay.
All right.
Go ahead.
Again, I based even on student trustees' comments about that the consultation is not just about looking at. Again, I see that amendment being very prescriptive about how the consultation can be, and everything else, and so I just caution that that's the way the amendment is. I just think that we asked for, the original comment from Associate Director Markovsky says that they would bring with the consultation changing the consultation process to ensure it had broader perspective, and what we were going to do is a lot more thing, because we have the ability to add all the things we want to think about, and that's just my comment. Thanks.
We'll call the vote.
Thank you. Trustee Arsenault?
I am not in favor.
Trustee Brown?
Opposed?
In favor. In favor.
Thank you. Trustee Edwards?
Not in favor.
Trustee Linton?
In favor?
Trustee Miller?
Not in favor.
Trustee Morton?
Not in favor.
Trustee Oldfield?
In favor?
Trustee Panillo?
In favor.
Trustee Thatcher?
Opposed?
Trustee Thompson?
In favor.
To the student trustees' non-binding vote, student trustee Cameron?
In favor.
Student trustee Edwards?
In favor.
Student trustee Hewitt?
In favor.
So the vote is 5 in favor and 5 trustees opposed
So
to
the
it.
motion is
Voting trustees.
defeated. Thank you. And now we'll go back to the main motion. And when you have a moment, Executive Lead Surjanic, if you could put that up for us again. So looking at the main motion, and I'm going to call the question.
Do you require it on the screen? It's the recommendations on page 36.
It is, it's a
report.
recommendation on page 36. Yes.
I
Thank
don't have
you.
it at my fingertips, so.
Yes. All right. Trustees? We're voting on the main motion that is on page 36, moved by Trustee Morton and seconded by Trustee Edwards. All in favor? Any opposed? I believe that the motion carries. Moving on to recommended action 7B, and I'm going to call on Trustee Panillo and Trustee Oldfield for the notice of motion. And I believe that Executive Lead Surjanic does have that to put up on the screen for us.
Thank you, Chair. Trustee Oldfield, do you want to start, or would you like me to go ahead?
Wow.
Thank you all. This is a notice of motion following discussions had surrounding challenges that are being faced within schools and in communities across the region and the board. And the notice of motion is for the following motion: that the Board of Trustees strike an ad hoc committee comprised of trustees with input from student trustees, school administrators, union representatives, and senior staff with the purpose of monitoring and evaluating issues such as bullying prevention and intervention, suspensions and expulsions, progressive discipline, workplace violence, and harassment. The committee shall collaboratively build policy, strategies, and standards for safety and sustainability and measure the implementation of the collaborative plans over 3 years.
Thank you very much. So we have the notice of motion that'll be going forward to the next board meeting. Moving on to information items then, 8A, and I'll call...
Chair Thatcher, I'm not sure that's the intent of the mover. I think you may seek clarification from Trustee Pennell on that issue.
Trustee Pinello, Council Cotter is suggesting that that may not be your intent.
Through you, Chair, Council Cotter, I did have a question pertaining to process for this, because at the last governance meeting, amendments to bylaws were made essentially whereby trustees can, on one hand, bypass the governance committee and then have discussions at board. My question to you would be, is it appropriate for trustees to discuss this motion here, or for us to just issue notice for the following board meeting? Also, does this require a seconder? Because that was skimmed over as well.
Thank you. And through you, Chair Thatcher. So a couple of points. Yes, we do require seconders at Committee of the Whole standing meetings and Committee of the Whole meetings. Other committee meetings we don't, but for this particular meeting we do require seconders. The notice of motion requirements are for a new policy. in our bylaws, there's no requirement for a notice of motion to establish an ad hoc committee. So I think it's, subject to trustees having the information they need and the matter being on, which it's now on the agenda, but there's nothing improper with suggesting a motion or bringing a motion to establish an ad hoc committee at a standing committee meeting. The matter's on the agenda, and so I think, you're free to move it. It would be my recommendation to the chair. I mean, if that's what, I guess we're in a bit of a, did people appreciate
Councillor
that when
Cotter,
they added the
are you
matter to the
suggesting
agenda?
then that this could go forward as a motion, and then we'll have a seconder and discussion and vote on it, so on? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I would actually, that is what I'm suggesting, but I guess it depends on exactly what the amendment was at the start of the meeting, was and what did trustees understand that? And if they, the term notice of motion doesn't apply to the establishment of an ad hoc committee, so it's a misnomer. So I just took it to mean she was providing written notice of what she intended to move tonight.
So, Councillor Cotter, I know that the agenda has already been approved. So I suppose we could, would it be appropriate then to ask for a change in that wording? And would we require 2/3 majority?
No, I think the agenda, the matter was approved without, seeking clarification at that time. So I think, in fairness to Trustee Pinello, the matter's on the agenda. I think if it's seconded, then the committee should deal with the motion.
So put it through as a motion, looking for a seconder now.
Correct.
Thank you. Trustee Pinello, that is going through as a motion then, and we're looking for a seconder to your motion. Trustee Oldfield, will you be seconding that motion?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion. It has been moved and seconded. Is there discussion? Trustee Brown.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. I see value in this recommendation, but I'm a bit concerned that this has already been dealt with on an operational level, and I'm not sure, maybe the team could let me know. So, because there's lots of moving parts to this motion, and there is a need for all of the things that are suggested in the motion, but I'm wondering whether or not are these areas already being looked at before we decide to have an ad hoc committee? And I can't answer that, so.
I'm prepared to jump in, if that's okay, Chair Thatcher, and I'll ask Associate Director Markowski, I think, as well. He can provide, I think, the comments in terms of what's being done, but before doing that, I just wanted to provide some comments in terms of the scope of the motion and the scope of an ad hoc committee. So I guess the first thing that I would point out is that ad hoc committees can only exist to serve the policy-making function of the board. So if the board strikes an ad hoc committee, it has to do so to advise the board on policy. And that's the function of the committee. So what is it doing in furtherance of that objective? Is it gathering information? Is it, what's the scope of that, and what are they coming back to the board with on what policy matters? So I think that's a question you have to ask yourself first. What policy-making function does an ad hoc committee serve? Ad hoc committees, it's the sort of the flip side of the same coin, but ad hoc committees have no authority to make any decisions. So all they can do is come back with a recommendation on policy to the board. So that's sort of the second part. As you've sort of flagged in your question, Trustee Brown, the ad hoc committees, in serving the policy function of the board, can't get engaged in operational matters. So that's another factor when striking an ad hoc committee is there risk that the committee is treading on operational matters. I think that's a that's, at first blush, looking at the motion, that's certainly something that the board's going to want to consider. I think, what's the operational impact? So any ad hoc committee has to serve the policy function of the board, has to respect the operational function of the CEO and the Director of Education. So those are two parts there. The other part I would say is that in striking an ad hoc committee, you have to consider what information might be available to the committee. So again, the information that's available to the committee has to be in furtherance of the policymaking function. So confidential data around violent incidents, for example, would not be provided to the committee if it was not in relation to a specific policy objective. And even more restrictions around personal information, obviously under MFIPA. And I'm not suggesting that that's the intent of the motion. I'm just suggesting that in crafting the committee, that's a live consideration when considering an ad hoc committee. So those are some general sort of parameters I wanted to put on the table in light of the motion. But I think in response to your specific question, Associate Director Markovsky can probably assist in terms of what's being done.
Associate Director Markovsky, and then I have a speakers list here. Then I'll go to Chair Edwards and then Trustee Oldfield. So call on you first, Associate Director Markovsky.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Thatcher. I will mention, I know previously, a couple years ago, there was an incidents ad hoc committee that was created by the Board of Trustees some years ago. I believe it was in 2021, completed its mandate, and there was some, what I would say, recommendations that came from that committee that we have since implemented. I'm not going to go through all the layers, but I think there's a variety of structures in relation to the motion that are currently being implemented in relation to suspension data, incident data, what we do to intervene. There's a positive school climate report that comes forward to trustees annually. Much of that information is captured within that report, and it gives you a summary annually in terms of the work that's being done. I will also mention we have had considerable voice, particularly from our education partners, in relation to the work that we're doing when incidents do occur. Right now, we're in the very early stages. We have struck an incidents committee that will have union and board representation on it. We have a third-party facilitator that is going to help lead that conversation. And what we're trying to do is move away from kind of that reactive process that we've been stuck on, but rather look at a proactive approach in terms of how it is that we engage in the work. Centering students, ensuring that we're creating environments where they're thriving, and at the same time meeting the needs of staff within that context. Again, we're in the very early days. We have meetings set up at the end of this month, and happy to provide you with further information in terms of how that evolves, but it is very operational in nature and actually really addresses some of the key areas within this motion. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of pieces that are already currently in play that speak to the motion that's been brought forward.
Just for clarification purposes, Associate Director Markovsky, this incident committee that you've created that includes board staff and unions, is this in response to the motion that was deferred to May?
Thank you, and through you, Chair Thatcher, I would say that that was one variable of many, but we've been having ongoing conversations with our partners in relation to the work that's being done. Much of the conversations has been taking place through the Joint Health and Safety Committee. Again, there's a variety of other committees that are engaging in this work, and I think this was a way for us to rethink what's currently taking place, but doing it in an organic way rather than coming at the table in a prescribed manner. And really the idea here was that CUPE, ETFO, OSSTF, within all of our bargaining units, there would be representation that comes forward, work with board personnel to devise what I would say a system framework in dealing with incidents. And again, happy to provide updates, but we're in the very early days. It will be some time before I have an update to share.
Chair Edwards, if you would turn on your mic, I'll call on you first.
I actually was thinking of a point of information, but I think I've somewhat got it. But at this point in time, when I'm looking at, and this is the problem when we get motions that are presented, and I'm trying to sit there and go through it. Trustee Brown looked at it, and much of it seems very operational, as well as I don't see a policy out of there. What I see is coming out of his measures that of implementation and collaborative plans, which are operational. And although I and there's so many pieces that were coming up in May, the May report, that might change my perspective on some of these things, and some of the data that's being provided at that point in time. So it's very operational, and I just don't see how, at this point in time, how it relates to policy, although I understand some of the backing and some of the information that is required in some of the complaints. An associate director just mentioned something that is being done operationally that will probably come forward as well in the report. So again, I can't support it because it really is an operational motion.
Trustee Oldfield?
Actually, I think Trustee Pinello was ahead of me. I think she's been waiting for a while.
Sorry? Trustee Pinello?
Trustee Pinello was
Yes, I
ahead of
have
me.
her on my speakers list. I have her on my speakers list. I have you, then Student Trustee Cameron, and then Trustee Pinello. So go ahead, Trustee Oldfield.
I wasn't first, but I mean, I wanted to speak in favor of this. I feel, although I can see why people might think it's operational, I think it depends on what comes out of this. And I think, I think about my experience on other committees, like SEAC, for instance, where, certainly there are things that come out of that committee that are operational, but as a trustee sitting on that committee, it provides me with an insight that I don't get. And nothing against data that comes and reports that come from staff. There's a lot of great information that comes from staff, but that is very different than listening firsthand to people who it's their lived experience, whether that's staff or whoever it is that we're talking to, school administrators, that type of thing. And so it's the value of the knowledge of hearing firsthand from people what that data actually means, in the real world. And to be able to develop policy and to, we're going into budget and developing a strategic plan and, potentially maybe policy that supports this. I really feel that, these are complex issues, and a report with data isn't sufficient from my perspective, and I'm only speaking for me, in terms of really understanding what the real issues are and how to combat some of the problems that we're experiencing. So I don't see it. I know it could read as operational, but if you look at SEAC or some of the other committees, sure, there are operational things that come out of them, but that's not what the trustees are there to do on those committees. But it is certainly, I think, beneficial if I were to think about just the learning curve I've had since sitting on SEAC. And certainly, we hear regularly from Trustee McCauley and other staff on those issues. It's great information, but that's still different than being in the room with the people who are directly impacted by this on a daily basis. And I think it's a missed opportunity to really get at what some of these issues are, things that are happening in the schools. There's a huge issue, and we're seeing increase in violent incidences happening in Toronto, and it's spreading. And I'd really like to be on the proactive end of this and really understanding and being able to develop policy so that staff can go. And I think we heard earlier that there was a committee, I think, did you say in 2021? And that recommendations came out of that. So it is something that can be positive, but it's a different environment post-COVID. And I think there are some different issues out there, and I really feel to be able to make informed decisions around policy and to develop policy, we really need to know. And it's more than just data in a report.
Thank you, Trustee Oldfield. Go to Student Trustee Cameron.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to say that I don't really have any concerns about the operational, potential of this. Like, the ad hoc committee can't do anything operational, and I'm sure that staff who are working with the committee will remind the committee whenever that happens, if it happens or whatnot. But I think the language is clear as well. It says monitoring and evaluating issues, and then it lists a bunch of things, and then it talks about those issues saying build policies around those issues. So I think it's pretty clear that it won't be operational. As well, I think this committee's not going to do any harm. I think this committee could only benefit the board in getting information and input from the community and the people that it lists in the motion. And that it has a pretty clear outline of what its job would be to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. I'm going to go to Trustee Piniello. Shailene, I'm sorry if you had your hand up first. It's just impossible from my perspective here to know who had their hand up first. So your turn.
Thank you, Chair. No worries. Through you, I appreciate Trustee Oldfield and Student Trustee Cameron's comments as well, and I understand where people may initially perceive this to be operational. I would encourage, I'm going to point out a couple of key things that are in there, specifically that last bit, which is the call to action. So the first half of the motion simply outlines who should be involved in said committee. And the last part really outlines how it would be governance focused. And I think this is important because it's not operational. And I think it's really important for us as trustees to actually meet people where they're at. And I don't think it's good enough. I mean, I'm not currently sitting in the boardroom, but if I were, I would say I don't think it's good enough for us to just sit here and expect reports to, fill in lived experiences, because each one of us brings lived experience to the board that we want reflected and that we want honored and valued. And I think it's our responsibility to do the same for those who are living and working and keeping our schools functional, as well as those who are attending them. And so on that note, I think experience really informs policy. That's always really how it's been. It's whose dominant experiences are informing policy. And we know that our schools are facing challenges because it's not just our board, it's province-wide. There's increased violence, there's increased need for mental health supports, for special education funding, for sustainability with employment, for safety and supports. And we can receive a great deal of wonderful reports prepared to us by very dedicated staff at the board office, but it's also very different when we are sitting in a circle with people who all have different perspectives to offer us, that when we return to this room, figuratively, we can put that forward. And so I appreciate Trustee Oldfield's comments about the other committees that function in different ways to give us the perspectives that we might be missing. And I certainly don't work in a DDSB school, obviously. And so I don't see what happens on a day-to-day. And yet here we are with the ability to make policy that would impact in various ways people who do attend work in these schools, and we haven't heard from them. And a strategic plan once every 4 years, I don't think is adequate for us to really start building those bridges. So I think it's a great opportunity for trustees to do that, for us to go outside of the board office and into different spaces where we get to listen. And what we do with that and the recommendations that are shared with us are privileges. They're not rights. And that is something big that I know we were talking about with strat planning, because anyone else's wisdom, any other community's wisdom and guidance that they provide us is a gift to us, not a given, and that's, we have to do the relationship building. So we don't know what we don't know, and I think that if we as this board want to do things differently with intentionality and with equity in mind, that this is a really great step, it's relatively simple for us to strike an ad hoc, but that last sentence, the measurement of implementation, we also have to be held to account in some capacity, whereby if policy that we put forward or amend isn't actually having the dedicated outcome that we foresee, we need to know that, because then we can come back to this space and change and adjust and ask community again. We're not going to get it right all the time on the first try, but if we go in good faith with the intention of measuring where things are working, where they're not, and utilizing the knowledge and wisdom that others have in our schools every day, we'll get a little bit closer to a better future. So that's all I have to say about that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Trustee Brown.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I think what it is, Trustee Pinello, as I listened to what you had to say, I think when it comes to policy, I know that the Governance and Policy Committee is pretty new. So I think what I was struggling with is also developing policy when we already have a committee to develop policy. But I think if I was to make an amendment, I don't know if I can make an amendment, is that if we did strike an ad hoc committee, maybe to report into the Governance Committee rather than the board. Just a suggestion, because then that would make more sense to me, that it's the groundwork getting done for policy, but it would still need to come through governance. I'm just trying to, I'm just thinking how it works. I would hate for it to come to the board without being reviewed at governance. It's a recommendation.
Councillor Cotter, can you weigh in on that?
I think I'm just trying to pull up our bylaws, but I do believe our bylaws call for ad hoc committees to report to the standing committee.
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, it's a little, yeah, I think, yeah, and the governance committee is supposed to review all policies, so we have to sort of read those read those sections together. So if coming out of the ad hoc committee is a recommendation for a new policy or an amendment to a policy, then I think it's appropriate that that would go to governance. Other recommendations and reports, regular recommendations and reports, would come to the standing committee. But if it was a recommendation on policy, I think that's correct. It would go to governance.
Trustee Morton.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I can understand why this motion is coming forward. However, I'm looking at the motion itself. All of these topics are very important, whether it's bullying prevention, intervention, suspensions, expulsions, progressive discipline, workplace violence, harassment. Those are all very important topics, but it's far too broad. And for that reason, I couldn't support this motion. I also question the measurement over 3 years. An ad hoc committee has a beginning and an end, and I don't think we can say, we're going to do this for 3 years. So I'm sorry, I cannot support this motion.
Trustee Linton.
Great.
Finally, Stephen.
I know, I thought you guys forgot of kind of being discriminated against virtually. Sorry, this has been nothing on here. Anyway, I see all kinds of merit in this motion, and not to put words in Trustee Paniello's mouth, but I think there's an unsettling trend. That's the increase of these kinds of incidents, and you know we're continuing as trustees to hear these concerns from the constituents, from our community, from family and others. Also thinking, I know there's a bit of a conversation around operations and policies, but I think this committee and looking at this from a policy perspective does a couple of things. I think one of the things it does, it starts to create consistency around the organizational strategy, the way that the tasks are performed, the way that decisions are made, starts to look at guidelines and procedures. I think it's more efficient. It helps to streamline operations, increase efficiency, and even just the standards of how we're setting, tasks and the who and the measurements and KPIs around this, I think is extremely important. I think there's a piece around compliance, and it's ensuring that we're complying with, the Education Act and the bylaws and all these other rules and policies that we have. Yes, from an organization perspective, you're looking at how to do that, but from a policy perspective, we are looking at the compliance of it all. With my safety hat on, I'm thinking about risk management and how it helps us to manage risk by identifying those potential risks. We spoke a bit about that in our audit committee, and that actually kind of rang true. And again, I think this ad hoc committee could do some of that. And one of the things I've been harping on is around the communication. So I think we've been a little inconsistent with communicating some of these incidents and how frequently they're happening. So I think this kind of committee can facilitate communication and collaboration amongst us as board, amongst staff, amongst schools, and then amongst our partners. So I do think that it's critical for ensuring the success of what we do as a board, to supporting our students to address some of the violence and some of those issues that we're seeing. And not a change to the motion, but I do want to make a note that as we're starting to see a trend, I do want us to keep in mind that we are seeing an increase of weapons on school property. So not about to change. I'm not amending a motion to amend and another amendment. I just really want us to note that these are some really unsettling trends that I think through this motion we're trying to be proactive in addressing. So I will be supporting this motion. My long-winded way of saying in support. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Linton. I believe that Student Trustee Cameron is next up. Go ahead, Ben.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to encourage trustees to not get bogged down by the little things when we're talking about this motion. I think it's a good motion that can do some good, and that we shouldn't defeat it because of some little things. And I would encourage them to see what the committee can do, because I think it can do some good, and we should let it do its course and see what happens.
Thank you, Ben. I'm going to go to Trustee Miller.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I think this was so far a great discussion in terms of this motion that has been brought forward. I do still have some questions that I don't think it can be answered at the moment. I do think about the community and what we're hearing from parents and all of the concerns that have been brought forward. But at this time, because there's so many layers to this motion, I do find that there are relevance to the discussion and perhaps creating an ad hoc committee and what that might be like. But at this time, I would like to move a motion to defer this to the next board meeting.
We have a motion to defer this to the next board meeting. I need a seconder for that. Are you seconding that, Trustee Brown? No? Trustee Oldfield?
No, sorry.
You're not seconding the motion?
No. Sorry.
No.
Chair Thatcher, if I might, not that I want to be overly technical, but I'm not sure the standing committee can refer a matter to the board. So it may want to defer it to the next standing committee meeting.
Would we defer to the next standing?
I think that would be more appropriate if that's the intention.
All right. So thank you, Councillor Cotter. Appreciate that. Then would you like to just change your motion to defer to the next standing committee meeting? Okay, so the motion, we have the motion that's been moved to defer this to the next standing committee meeting. Do we have a seconder? Trustee Edwards? Any discussion? Trustee Brown, is the discussion around the motion to defer? Trustee Cameron?
Thank you, Chair. I just don't see why we would do this. I think it's pretty clear and I don't really see any more information that would come at the next standing committee unless to change the minds of trustees.
Thank you for your input. Trustee Brown, I think I'm not sure what your comment is, but I'm going to come to you before we call the question.
Oh, I wanted to make an amendment to this motion because not to second it being deferred. I'd like to make an amendment to this motion that's presented on the screen.
Well, we have a motion to defer, and I think that supersedes an amendment. So I'm going to call the question, and then we'll vote on that. And if that,
sorry, before I vote,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Trustee Oldfield.
Yeah, I want to be clear because I don't know if I'm necessarily for or against deferring it, but I'm trying to, and this sort of goes to what Trustee Cameron was saying. Then what is it that trustees are looking for in terms of information or like to be able to vote on it at the next standing as opposed to today? Like that would be my question.
I've just listening to some of the comments, Trustee Oldfield, that were made by some of the trustees that they I think would like a little bit of fine tuning and an opportunity maybe to make some amendments, maybe an opportunity for you to go away and take a look at the motion and bring it back to next standing. So. Unless there's a disagreement, I'm going to call the question to defer this motion to the next standing committee meeting. Six in favor. And if you wouldn't mind just putting your cards up again, I didn't get all the count. 2, 3, 4, 7 in favor and 2 opposed, I think I have. Motion carries. This motion will be deferred to the next standing committee meeting. Well, moving on to information items. And I'm going to call on the student trustees for their report. Trustee Cameron, Edwards, and Hewitt. When you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. This is our April student trustee report. I'll keep it short because it's been a long night. On March 7th and 8th, the first round of student trustee elections were held across the board. 4 candidates will advance to the second round of elections in Pickering, Ajax, and Whitby, Oshawa on April 18th and 19th. I'm happy to report that I will be one of those 4 candidates. I would also like to confirm for trustees that there will be no election in the north as the candidate from Uxbridge Secondary School will be acclaimed. As well, we have created a Senate committee to review the Senate constitution and structures to make Senate the most effective conduit for student voice and engagement that it can be. There are many ways that we are looking to improve Senate's functions, and we're excited for what will come out of this process, and we'll certainly keep trustees posted. That's all for our April report.
Thank you. Are there any questions for student trustees tonight? And I'm seeing none. So moving on, I'll call on Superintendent Mohammed Hamid for the student census update report.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. The report can be found on page 42 of your package. As we strive to ensure the success of every student in our community, the Durham District School Board recognizes the importance of upholding the human dignity of all students. We believe that diversity is an integral part of our school community and contributes to a rich tapestry of ideas and perspectives. As the communities we serve growing ever more diverse, it is essential that we gain a clear understanding of who it is that we serve in order to better support their achievement and well-being while upholding Indigenous and human rights. We are proud to invite the DDSB family to participate in the 2023 DDSB Student Census, which takes place in May of this year. The census will provide us with valuable information on student populations and school communities, helping us identify barriers to success, engagement, and well-being, and allowing us to address these barriers and improve experiences and outcomes for all students. We understand the importance of maintaining confidentiality and privacy, and reiterate that no student will be identified in our reporting. All responses will be de-identified and stored in a secure, confidential, and separate database that only a very small number of authorized DDSB research staff will have access to. As we extend an invitation to participate in the census, it's important to stress that this is completely voluntary. We believe the more individuals who choose to complete the census, the more comprehensive and valuable the information will be for our school improvement efforts. Everyone's contribution would be greatly appreciated. The Durham District School Board remains committed to ensuring the success of all of our students, and the student census is an important step towards that goal. Let's work together to create a more inclusive and supportive learning environment for everybody. This report is provided to the Board of Trustees for information. I'm happy to answer any questions that may arise.
Looking for questions or comments for Superintendent Hamid? And I'm seeing none. I'm moving on then to item C, and I'll call on Associate Director David Wright for the 2022-23 interim financial report.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and through you, it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce Jennifer Machin, Senior Finance Manager, who is with us this evening to present the report. Jennifer?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide the Board of Trustees information relating to the operating expenditures for the period ending February 28th, 2023, or Q2. Operating expenditures are 48.4% of the 2022-2023 revised estimates amount. Overall expenses are in line with the prior year, with some timing differences impacting continuing education and staff development. Continuing education variances relate to summer school, and staff development variances relate to a district-wide pause on professional development in response to ongoing staffing pressures. This report is provided to the Board of Trustees for information only, and I'm happy to answer any questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I'm looking, I believe we have a question from Chair Edwards. Go ahead, Donna.
Thank you. I'm just, could you just remind me as far as what other non-operating expenditures are, just because there's a 65.5, percentage that already has been spent, and I just need a recollection of that. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. That other non-operating includes staff on loan, as well as priorities and partnerships funding. So the timing can be a little bit different because the fiscal year isn't always the same as ours with the funding that we receive.
Supplemental? No? Thank you. And I'm seeing no further questions or comments, so I'm moving on to Associate Director David Wright for the Audit Committee meeting summary.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just a couple of things I'd like to highlight. This is our first meeting with our new 3 new trustee audit committee members. Really pleased to see the new members in attendance. A little bit of a learning curve with the audit committee, but the meeting went very smoothly. The other highlight was the election of Leslie Miller as the chair of the committee. Leslie is one of our external audit committee members. The rest of the summary is in your package. Really happy to answer any questions if there are any. Thanks.
And I see no questions, Associate Director. Thank you very much for the report. Trustee Cunningham is sends regrets this evening. Just wondering, Trustee Oldfield, if there is anything to report from OPSPA this evening.
No, there's no report.
No report. So as there is no further business, this meeting is now adjourned.
1.
Thank you. The special board meeting of Monday, April 3rd is now called to order. In the spirit of truth and reconciliation, I would like to give the land acknowledgement. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treated territories of Mississauga Island First Nations, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. Do we have any declarations of interest? Seeing none. Before we just move to the adoption of the agenda, I just want to note that item B is the adoption of any resolutions from Camera of the Whole, a Committee of the Whole, but it's not in camera, it's just standing committee. So with that revision, can I have a motion to approve the agenda? Trustee Thatcher, Trustee Brown, all those in favor? Thank you. Moving on to the recommended actions, as far as this point in time, is the adoption of the of the resolution of the Standing Committee regarding the school calendar. Trustee Thatcher, sorry, would help if I do this, except it says my name.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I move that the board now adopt the resolution and approve the actions of the April 3rd, 2023 Standing Committee meeting.
Okay, I have a mover. I need a seconder. Trustee Arsenault, any discussions on that? Seeing none, I call the vote. All those in favor? Anybody opposed? Seeing none, that motion's carried. And actually, B is the same as A. So we've actually, B is the same as A, so we're just completed the agenda as approved. So I have a motion to adjourn. Trustee Brown, Trustee Morton, good night, everybody. Thank you.